Talk. Some say underhivers do nothing but talk, that they chatter like reprieved convicts coming out of solitary. Fact is, to them, talking is all about survival. Where the lashworms have taken root, where the waste spills are toxic, who's top dog, where to find trade or scav, who's new in town. It's an unwritten law that nothing is taboo down here. A refusal to answer just about any question is a tacit invitation for a fight, not that it's uncommon to see it used as such. So it is that the drinking holes and slop shops are always filled with a hubbub of gossip that hangs in heavy clouds like the twisting obscura smoke and the greasy fumes of tallow candles. So when she walked into Hagen's place, everyone, and I mean everyone, already knew that Mad Donna was in the settlement of Glory Hole. It wasn't like in the pic shows. The music didn't stop. Everyone didn't shut up and stop what they were doing to stare. But there was a dissemblable dip in the noise, and a dozen subtle shifts in body postures betrayed curiosity, or fear, or bravado, or guardedness in the crowd. She gazed brazenly at the inhabitants of the shadowy bar with her brilliant blue eye, zapping them with 1,000,000,000 volts of bad attitude. You get a tough crowd in Hagen's place. But few were brave enough to meet her gaze, and no one was about to challenge her right to be there. Outlaw, psycho bitch, renegade noble. With a multiple choice of reasons like that to choose from, it was easy to hate or fear Mad Donna. Her gory reputation had spread through bad zones like a 20K rad cloud in the 5 cycles she had been below. She was easy on the eye, with a dancer's long legs and a set of bewitching curves, more flaunted than obscured by her body casque. Her face would have been beautiful if it wasn't etched by hard lines of cruelty and despair. Legend had it that she'd torn her own eye out years before when a barkeep had told her she was pretty, and now one socket was covered by a glittering, unblinking bionic. Truly, there was more softness and compassion in that metal eye than the remaining real one. She carried well-worn weapons on her curving hips, 2 pistols and a slender chainsword she called 71, for the number of fingers and toes it had chopped off in its time. A dozen pairs of eyes in Hagen's place quickly found other places to be. She ordered Wild Snake and was greeted by 2 Escher gangers, Tola and Avignon, emerging from a side booth looking like they didn't really want to be there. The 3 had obvious deal talk to conduct. Tola was speaking fast and waving her hands, Avignon chiming in, Donna nodding occasionally. No doubt they wanted to hire Donna's renowned fighting skills as insurance for some scavran, gang fight, or turf war. Meanwhile, tongues were wagging amongst the assembled underhivers and fighters, telling and retelling the old stories about Mad Donna. There was the one of how she had murdered her noble husband in the spire, with a silver fish fork no less, Akka's fishbelly had added knowingly, gouged out his eyes. Then how she had fled to Downhive to escape her father's wrath, somehow staying one step ahead of the enforcers and bounty hunters all the way. How she had even ghosted through the impenetrable mass of security at the wall to get from the spire into Hive City. How she had killed her own sister, how she had skinned a Goliath who crossed her once, how she had carved out a killer reputation in half a decade of gang fights and craziness. Gradually, thoughts turned to other things, and cups rose, dice rattled, and chips fell once again. That was when it happened. A new voice was heard above the murmur of talk in the bar, and what it said produced that immediate black hole of silence so beloved of storytellers. No one has dared use that name around me for 5 years, so you'd better have a damn good reason for using it now. The man at the edge of death was a scrawny young pit slave. A Merchant's Guild ownership stud in his forehead winked nervously, a millimeter above the last pistol's hungry muzzle. I have a message from Gilder Theodosrelli for Donna Ulanti, he bleated. Please, don't kill me. Donna scanned around the bar without moving the gun and wondered which sack of pus had named her to this hapless rube. Many faces flinched away at her icy glare, but none revealed themselves as the potential sumpsterer. She bolstered the pistol and pointedly turned her back, opening her gloved hand, palm up in front of the slave's nose. After a moment's hesitation, A grimy scrawl was pressed into her hand, and the slave fled. "What the freak?" said Tola, gazing at the authentic-looking gilder seal embossed in metallic inks on the pale roll of hide. "Someone wants your attention," observed Avignon wisely, an effect she ruined only marginally, by dripping wild snake over her chin as she swigged back another shot. "Someone is asking for a kicking," said Mad Donna, and dropped the message on the slop-pooled bar top. "Aren't you going to read it?" asked Tola. Madonna shook her head. "No, I'm going to finish this bottle and then find Gilder the Adolius Freakin Relly and break it over his no doubt fat and balding head." Her gaze was distant. "No one has messages for Ulanti to hear. She's long dead." "Can I read it?" Tola was nothing if not impetuous, little more than a Juve really, an effect enhanced by her close-cropped, dirty blonde hair. Donna gazed at her evenly for a moment. "Sure." Avignon gave Tola a long-suffering, "I can't believe you just did that" look, but Tola was too busy breaking the seal and unrolling the scroll to notice. Her lips moved unconsciously as she read the words. Avignon impatiently snatched the scroll out of Tola's hands and laid it out on the bar for them all to see. It was handwritten. The practiced pen strokes of a scribe were now growing soft-edged like patches of mold as the pale hide drank up puddles of cheap alcohol. But it had been nicely written. It read, "To the esteemed noble dame Donna Stride, Sylvanus of the House of Ulanti. Please forgive this unwarranted intrusion, but a matter has come to my attention regarding your past that I felt you should be apprised of with immediacy. I feel it would be unwise to communicate the matter in a simple letter, but I feel sure that such knowledge could be conveyed in person for a suitable consideration. I can be contacted via Strachan's warehouse on the 3rd tier should you wish to pursue this matter further. Yours in faith, Citrelli of the Merchants Guild." "Drap," belched Avignon. "No, blackmail. He wants to get a payoff," said Tola. "What he's saying is, pay me off, or I'll tell someone else about it, and they'll pay me off instead." "Could be either or both," said Donna. "Most likely the worm has already sold me out and wants to double his money." Her blue eye was hard and bright with interest. "It's been tried by bounty hunters before, but never by a gilder. The Merchant Guild formed the tenuous threads that stitched the scattered settlements of the Underhive together, moving from place to place, trading their wares. They were powerful enough to enjoy as much of a protected status as anyone could claim in the Hive bottom, the sole supplier of essentials and comforts that were unobtainable otherwise. Flat cloth, lumabulbs, protein supplements, data slates, picked slugs, power packs, air filters, fuel rods. They had their fingers in lots of pies, and it didn't bode well to make an enemy of one. Gilders had a habit of sticking together, and could swing enough credits to put out a bounty so big it would mean a death sentence for just about anybody. Common wisdom was that when Gilders took an interest, it meant bad things were right around the corner. "You gonna go?" Tola asked. Donna shook her head. "I'd have to be crazy to fall for it." She wadded up the letter and threw it at Hagen. "More snake, and make it good, or there'll be hell to pay." And that was that. The settlement of Glory Hole was called that because it was a hole, a fungus-like outcropping of trade posts, hovels, workshops, rickety gantries, palisades and trailing cables clustered around a 60-story drop between two half-cease collapsed domes. Centuries ago, neglect and unimaginable loads from Hive City above had caused this part of the Underhive to splinter and crack like old bones. A half-dome that was once half a mile high and 6 across had been crushed down to a quarter of that size, and the falling debris opened a hole to a larger, older dome beneath that had been previously sealed off by an unbreakable floor of thick ferrocrete. Underhivers are great survivors by nature. Those that aren't get killed off too quickly to find out why. After pulling themselves out of the wreckage, they soon investigated the giant hole. The freshly opened dome turned out to be a cornucopia of scab and scrap, buried in a vast sea of dust and detritus. that was dubbed the White Wastes. People came from all over to try their hand at plumbing the depths, so the settlement of Glory Hole sprang into existence to supply their needs and relieve them of their newly found wealth. Some of the boldest fortune hunters came back with archaeotech hoards big enough to buy a place in the spire, or so the stories went, and some didn't come back at all. The White Wastes below had long since been tapped out by Donna's day, but the settlement of Glory Hole hung on just because it was there. Most of the gambling holes and flesh joints had closed down, but enough people stayed around to make it a community. Fungus farmers and rat herders brought their produce there, guilders took their cut, gangs and hired guns generally passed right on through, and the authorities generally stayed away. That's just the way the Underhivers liked things. Mad Donna made her way unsteadily across the second tier, its rusty patchwork of metal plates and mesh grills creaking every step of the way. She was contemplating the fact that a little less wild snake and bravado earlier on would have made things a lot easier for her now, but she was definitely intrigued. It had taken a while for it to settle in, but it was there now, and nagging like a loose tooth. What she hadn't told Tola and Avignon were the two things that stood out in Relly's letter. Firstly, it had followed the correct Hive forms of address for herself as aspirer. Nobledom was an old term that just emphasized that nagging fact. Then there was the big one. Relly had used her full name. That is, Donna Silvanus Ulanti. The very name brought back bad memories and a surprisingly hot flush of anger. That name was not commonly known in the Underhive. Dion Ulanti for sure, but her full name hadn't even been used on the bounty flyers. That, more than anything else, pointed to the genuine involvement of another noble, quite possibly even a family member. Donna approached the edge of the tier, where it was unfenced and ragged before the yawning drop. It was quiet in this section, far from the nearest toll lift. She picked out a sturdy-looking cable and carefully wrapped her legs around it before sliding herself over the edge. A cool, fetid breeze blew up from the depths and raffled her long hair with ghostly fingers as she swarmed down the cable. The floodlit warehouses of the next tier looked dull-sized and distant below, further down than she had thought. The indirect approach of sneaking down onto the third tier without being seen had seemed the smart thing to do. Dangling above a dizzying drop on a rusted old cable made it seem a lot less smart. "Noble damn," she hissed to herself. "Gesselvanus," she spat. Gripping the cable suddenly seemed a lot easier when she could envisage it as her father's throat. Strachan's warehouse had the trappings of a typical gilder place: 3-meter fence rigged with booby traps, a main gate that could stop a tank, guard towers, wall guns. Donna squatted on a nearby roof and contemplated her options. She counted 2 armed pit slaves making the rounds inside the compound, and 3 more in the towers. Jumping the fence was just about possible if she got it right. She had thought about just going up to the gate and demanding to see Relly, but even Mad Donna wasn't that crazy. It started to rain, a fine drizzle of condensation falling from the upper layers and bringing a smell of wet ash sharpened by a tang of ammonia. The 2 slaves in the compound hurried for cover, obviously frightened of acid rain. Stupid green hivers, Donna thought to herself as she dropped from the roof. The kind of effluvia from above which could strip flesh from bones smelled of rotten fruit. This rain produced only a mild prickling burn and was actually good for getting rid of lice and other parasites. She ran, fast and limber, towards the fence with its ominous hanging fruit of booby-trap frag grenades and scatter shells. At the last instant, she leapt forward and up, kicking her legs high and arching her body to clear the top of the fence. Wild Snake in the wet surface conspired to screw up her landing, so she turned it into a shoulder roll and came up next to a pile of crates. No alarm sounded from the slaves in their little towers. All good. A sort of covered veranda ran around the outside of the warehouse, cloaked with invitingly deep shadows. She moved cautiously towards it, resisting the urge to run and staying in cover. The 2 pit slaves on patrol rounded the corner and she froze as they went by. They were tough-looking characters for all their obvious inexperience, Like most pit slaves, their owner had modified them with crude bionics to suit their function better. One's arm ended in a circular buzzsaw blade and his legs in metal claw feet that rang on the veranda as he approached. The other sported a piston-powered set of shears on one forearm and a half-skull of metal. Both were carrying big-bore stub pistols and a bandolier of cartridges. The modified pair was making more noise than a Goliath gang at a line dance and passed on obliviously. As they rounded the corner out of sight, she got up and started across the few meters of open space to the veranda. Then, it happened. A door opened and Donna made out a figure emerging. She was then blinded by a row of floodlights kicking on along the edge of the building, bathed in a harsh sea of light, totally unfamiliar to someone used to the natural gloom of the Underhive. As she tensed to spring back, a hot-shot lasblast scored the plates at her feet in a glowing, spitting question mark. Avignon had been right. It was a trap, and Donna was well and truly hiked. Don Ulanti, aka Mad Donna, by the authority of Lord Helmore, I arrest you on warrants outstanding in the Spire. She recognized the harsh, whispering voice. It was Chalet Bach, an ex-Delagua gang fighter turned bounty hunter. If he was here, the puke with the hotshot was probably his cousin, Kel Bach. Like so much else in the Underhive, bounty hunting was a family business. Drop your weapons. Come and get 'em, Chalet, if you've got enough fingers left to try. Another hot shot sizzled into the plating close enough to make her involuntarily skip sidewise. This was hopeless. She could hear the two pit slaves coming back, but she could barely make out either them or Shalash in the glare. She raised her hands and closed her bright blue eye. One thing most people forgot when it came to bionics was that good ones could have distinct advantages over the fleshy original. Donna's artificial eye was a top-range Van Saar model. Among several useful quirks, it featured an automatic photosensitive glare filter. Chalet, a bald, bulky figure in a long flak coat, was standing a little to the left of the door, covering Donna with the red dot of a bolt pistol targeter. Buzzsaw and Shears were approaching from the right. Shears had his pistol holstered and was carrying a jangling set of manacles. Donna reckoned Kel was in a tower also off to the right. Shears grinned confidently and stepped forward to toss the manacles to her. As he did so, he momentarily blocked Shalaj's line of fire. That moment was all Donna needed. She bounded forward and grabbed Shears in an arm lock. Buzzsaw's stub pistol boomed off a round, but fired wide, and Kill's shot was a fraction of a second slow as the hot shot's power pack struggled to build up a fresh charge. Shears howled when Donna bit off his remaining ear and spat it in his face. Shalaj cursed. Blinded by the hot, sticky blood covering his bionic thermal sensor and reeling off balance, Shears was in trouble and he knew it. He panicked and tried to use his piston-enhanced strength to throw the snarling, laughing woman off, but Donna spun him by the elbow and rammed his cumbersome bionic blades into Buzzsaw's guts. It was unfortunate for the bloody pit slave that Chile's bolt round caught Shears just above the eye at that same moment. The 0.75 mass reactive gyrojet pulped his head like a ripe melon being hit by a truck. His death reflex jerked his shears shut and messily eviscerated Buzzsaw into the bargain. Donna was still moving while the pit slaves swayed in their gore-slicked embrace of death. Chalet expected her to ran for cover, diving left or right, but she came straight at him instead, ripping out 71 and thumbing the chain blade to life. Her shoulder blades itched with the expectation of a hot shot at any moment, but Kel was obviously off form and no shot came. Chalaj didn't raise his pistol to shoot at Donna since that had cost him 3 fingers last time they met, and he'd learned from the experience. Instead, he ducked out into the yard where he could count on support from his cousin. Donna's screeching chain blade tore at Chalaj's coat as she made a backhanded slash, but she kept going, diving through the open door and into the warehouse. Donna rolled to her feet and kicked the door shut, pumping a couple of last shots through it at chest and groin height to dissuade pursuers. She turned and sprinted off between the rows of crates and bales, sword and pistol ready. Nothing rose to bar her path. She could hear shouting outside and then a volley of shots before the door banged open behind her. By that time, she had already found what she was looking for. 2 heavy trapdoors in the floor with a girder work, a frame and winch assembly over them. No gilder would pay the lift tolls to have their goods brought up Glory Hole, so each warehouse had their own hoist to the tier below. It was the ideal escape route out of the bounty hunter's trap, or it would have been if the trapdoors weren't secured by heavyweight tungsten maglocks. The bounty hunters became stalking shapes behind the rows of chipped plastic crates and overstuffed bales. The distinctive rising whine of Donna's plasma pistol about to discharge sent them ducking back like jackals before a lion. The warehouse was sharply lit by an actinic blaze as the pistol fired, a thunderclap report and wash of ozone sending hard black shadows leaping to the corners. Bounty hunters knew their guns and a plasma weapon took precious seconds to recharge. They moved quickly to encircle their cornered prize, emerging at the skeletal A-frame hoist in a coordinated rush. They found the trapdoors melted through, their edges still glowing cherry red from the fearsome heat of a plasma blast. Of Mad Donna, there was no sign. Donna swore, long and loud, as she applied a stinger mold poultice to her burned shoulder. A drip of molten steel had caught her as she clung to the bracing beneath Strachan's warehouse, listening to the Back brothers bitching and planning their next move. They hadn't mentioned Relly, so it didn't sound like he was in Glory Hole. She'd almost bitten through her lip, but hadn't uttered a sound. She was holed up, as Underhivers say, in a broken pipe, halfway up the wall of the dome below Glory Hole. She had a dew sheet stretched out and a small fire going with a couple of cat-sized rats roasting on spits, the dribbling grease hissing and popping in the flames. She kept an eye out in case any other scavengers were drawn to the smell, but most Underhive creatures instinctively steered clear of fire and smoke, except those on 2 legs, of course. Looking out into the gloom, Donna could see white ash dunes and mesas of fallen rockreed, topped with twisted forests of girders. The only thing moving was a distant string of lights, probably the lanterns of some gilder caravan. It wasn't safe here, but it was quiet, and it gave her some time to think. No matter how far she ran or how deep she buried herself, she could never outdistance her past. The Underhive was a haven for criminals and renegades of all sorts, and for hivers desperate enough to gamble everything on starting a new life at the very fringes of civilization. Most were running from something, but most were safely forgotten and ignored once they were in the Underhive. It received both outcasts and hopefuls to its dark bosom with equanimity. Not so for Ulanti. Being a feared and hunted outlaw sounded exciting and romantic, but the reality was a grim, sometimes desperate existence, dogged by the ghosts of the past. Donna's previous life in the Spire was a half-remembered dream, which at moments like this her mind would treacherously patch together as a mosaic of her best memories, pushing her further down the spiral road of regret and despair. Donna occasionally convinced herself it had all happened to someone else. In truth, she had become someone else now. Mad Donna had replaced Donna Ulanti, even though she wore her stolen flesh. She had fallen so far and lost so much of the comfort and security guaranteed by life in the Spire. Sometimes she wondered why she kept going at all. It would be so much easier just to put a pistol to her head and end it for good. To end up in the Underhive was the worst thing that could happen to someone from the Spire. Suspicion was the best you could hope for, since half of those you meet would be happy to kill you just for having an Uphiver accent. If the Underhivers didn't kill you, then there were 100 other hideous deathmongers close at hand. Spiders, scorpions, snakes, rats, millisars, carrion bats, ripperjacks, face-eaters, sludge jellies, lash whips, wireweed, brain leaves, gas spores, zombies, cannibals, mutants. The list went on, and there were plenty of other things even the Underhivers didn't have names for. There were also the toxic spills, the sludge pits, the acid rain, the gas pockets, the carcinogens in the dust, the food, the water, the air, the hive quakes, flash floods, electrical discharges, or the simple expedient of a long drop onto something unforgiving. It was not a gentle land. And now Donna must walk that land and find some answers. Find out how Relly had found her, and more importantly, why. In the Underhive, notoriety was like body odor. Everyone had it. Actually finding someone specific, instead of a bunch of rumors, took persistence and no little skill. If she was going to avoid being caught, Mad Donna needed to know a lot more about her hunters. She knew that the best places to find news on Guilders were the settlements of Dust Falls and Two Tunnels, both of which see more Guilder caravans than anywhere else because of their locations. The only alternative would be to keep running in the bad zones between settlements until the hunters caught up with her again, and next time she might not be so lucky. And why not simply end it all? Simply stop running and lie down to die, because then it would all have been for nothing, and she would have given in to her innermost demons, the ones with her father's voice that said it would have been better if she had never been born at all. Trekking to Dust Falls from Glory Hole usually meant a roundabout journey across the white wastes, up to the rusting gantries over Cliff Wall. From there, the commonest paths went through the looming halls and down the interweaving tunnels of the Lesser Trunk. There were other ways, quicker ones even, but that was the easiest and safest one. Because of that, there was always a good chance that gangers, outlaws, or both, and it's often hard to tell the difference, would be roving in parts of the looming halls, taxing or murdering travelers as took their fancy. Enterprising gangs often put up toll maps on Cliff Wall too, or fought vicious battles for possession of them. The alternative was to strike out straight across the wastes to the foot of Cliff Wall, go across the rotting pipes at its base, and into a confusing tangle of ancient turban chambers. If you then could find a way through the sludge pits and collapsed areas, you would emerge, perhaps, into the Generatoria Dome at the bottom of the Lesser Trunk, and would only be a march away from Dust Falls and the edge of the abyss. Going the roundabout route was simply not an option. There was too much of a chance of being recognized on the way and word getting back to the bounty hunters. They would have thrown out a web of informers around Glory Hole within an hour of losing her, hundreds of ears sharp for any news. Time was also an issue. If she kept ahead of any reports reaching Relly, she would have an edge. She desperately needed one. Flexing her shoulder experimentally, Donna found it surprisingly free of pain. The poultice was doing its work. She realized that her injury would not hinder her, and she was pleased since the lower route was sure to be physically demanding. She checked her weapons too, as the sludge pits were supposed to be rife with vermin. 71 was as close to full charge as it could be, its ceramite teeth sharp and moving freely. She found some torn scraps of Shala's coat caught between the teeth and braided them amid the other trinkets in her unkempt hair as a memento. Her last pistol was an exquisitely made Spira pattern that she had carried for as long as she had been in the Underhive. In all that time, she had never had to replace the power cell or even recharge it, nor once clean the muzzle lens. Yet it remained ever ready to inflict harm. She loved and hated the elegant pistol, and had almost thrown it away or sold it dozens of times over the years. The gun didn't care and continued to serve her as faithfully as a hunting hound. Her plasma pistol was a different story, a heavy, crudely made, and pug-ugly-looking Underhive piece. She had cut it out of the dead, nerveless hand of an outlaw called Capo Barra after a fight outside Two Tunnels. Capo and his gang had ceased to exist when Mad Donna and treacherous Escher had caught them in an ambush. The bounty fee from the grateful hivers of Two Tunnels had not been as great as promised, but the loot was excellent. Donna had kept the cumbersome plasma pistol because it was such a great equalizer. No matter how tough an opponent was, a blast of incandescent plasma would seriously wound or kill them, and they knew it. Even the sound of it about to discharge would make most foes duck for cover, and as the escape from the warehouse had proven, its ability to annihilate obstacles was more useful still. It was on a 3/4 charge, the power-hungry pig that it was, and firing it would have to remain a last resort until she was near a viable power source. Finding a replacement plasma flask for it would be harder still, where she was going. Smoked rat meat plus water from the dew sheet and filter can would be her food and drink for the journey. What she needed to do now was rest and save her strength for a few hours before setting out. She settled herself into the pipe and flipped her bionic eye to its alarm mode. If anything bigger than a fly approached her hiding place, a motion sensor would instantly wake her. She slept fitfully. The firing stuttered and died away into echoes. Donna stuck her head out to see what was going on, and a stub round smacked into the pillar right beside her, the instant her head was visible. Tola pulled her back in sharply. "Don't be stupid, Donna. They knows we're still here." Another shot, and a ricochet whined past, as if to underline the point. "So what do we do now, Tola?" Dawn tried to sound sarcastic instead of frightened, while pushing her blonde plaits out of her eyes. She felt unable to quite believe that she was being lectured by an Underhive brat 5 years her junior, who couldn't even get her name right. Tola didn't even seem to notice her fantastically withering glare. "Well, if we waits a while, they'll start a sneak in and a creepin' up here," she sang quietly, eyes wild with the rush of the firefight. "We could pop out then. Pow, pow. Maybe take a couple, but then they'd shoot us down like rats," she scowled dramatically. "Not good." Having a child talk to you as if you were another younger child is, Dion concluded, one of the most excruciating things that can ever happen to a person. She was just glad there was no one else around to hear it. If Tola kept this up, she'd rather get shot than stay behind the pillar with her. "And then," she prompted, "then we could try and sneaking away ourselves, find a spot and wait for them to come nosing around our old post, and then pump." Donna clapped her hand over Tola's mouth to stifle her from saying "pow, pow" again. Her eyes were bright with fearful intensity. "Shut it, Tola. I hear them," Donna hissed. And here they came. The jingle and squeak of gun harnesses a chilling counterpoint to the heavy clump of running boots. It was an incredibly menacing sound, the sound of people running to kill you. Dawn and Tola were in some kind of manufactoria, and it was as dry and dusty as old bones. Most of it seemed to be filled with rusting iron-plated tubs 3 times the height of a man, and Dawn surmised that they were big silos or mixing vats of some sort. Dawn had given up trying to tell what the places used to do, where the gang went. What was important is what they did now, and that was serve as a battleground for the gangs. Dion was trying to learn, but it was hard to look at things in a different way than you had been taught for your whole life. To look at a scene for the tactical instead of the aesthetic. But she was learning. Once she would have looked around the old building and appreciated the fractal chaos of its disintegrating roof panels and the coy glimpses they offered of the gantry garlanded ceiling of the city dome the building stood inside. She would have enjoyed the subtle irony of factories growing old and having to retire and going to pieces, just like the workers inside. But how this happened simply over a longer span of time. She might have written a poem about it, or painted a picture in charcoal to get those shadows right. Now, Dion looked for cover, and for somewhere she could run to before an enemy could draw a bead. She looked for what would stop a bullet or a laser blast, and what would only hide you, where the shadows lay, where the sniper nests might be. She was learning, oh yes. Dawn let Tola go, and the little brat just sprinted off without a word. Dawn followed a second later, skipping backwards for a couple of steps to cover their backs. Then she turned and ran after Tola as if a pack of murderers were on her heels, which they were. Tola jumped down a rubble embankment, slithering down broken chunks of rockcrete and kicking off a cascade of smaller bits and pieces that rattled and clattered explosively. It made enough noise to attract the attention of their pursuers, and shots boomed out. Dione stifled a little shriek as rounds cracked past her. She weaved and ran in a different direction, diving behind a fallen beam and dropping flat. Tola was out of sight, and Dawn was suddenly very much alone. She lay as quietly as she could and tried not to pant loudly. After a breathless moment, she crawled on her belly towards the other end of the beam and stopped to listen. The running noises had stopped. Everything had gone quiet again. Donna hated it. The fear, the feeling of impotence while everyone around her fought out a deadly battle, the fact that she hadn't had the faintest clue what was going on, where her side was, where the bad guys were, or what they were trying to achieve. Juves like her and Tola were a liability in a gang battle, Donna knew, because the experienced gangers told her so loudly and so often. No one wanted to risk a Juve getting in their way or drawing attention to them in a firefight, so Juves were abandoned in a fight to sink or swim on their own. It was a form of Underhive natural selection that was brutally efficient at creating live, competent Underhive gang fighters, or very dead wannabes. In some ways, it was no different to the Spire. It was all about looking out for number one. Gunfire cut through the silence. Flashes lit the shadows and made them jump, and a man screamed. Donna smiled at that, since her gang, the gang, was all female, like all those from House Escher. The other gang was all male, like all gangs from House Goliath. Whoever had just screamed was an enemy. Back in her other life, hazy and distant now, hut, was it only a few weeks ago she had still been living it? She had learned about the industrial houses of Hive City. The Goliaths, the Escher, the Delag, the Van Saar, the Orlocks, the Kadur. They weren't like the noble houses of the Spire. There was no pair bonding or guardianship of the bloodlines. Her tutors had taught her that they were mongrel partitions of the proletariat, with little more integrity than common labor guilds. Reality, of course, was very different. These industrial houses occupied well-defended enclaves within the city and dealt with one another only in conditions of utmost suspicion and secrecy. Each jealously guarded its own traditions and attitudes, and old enmities like rival nations. The noble houses frowned on anarchy and disorder in Hive City, so members of the industrial houses descended beneath Hive City to fight over the hundreds of square miles of abandoned habdomes, transitways, and other crumbling strata of previous industrious generations. The Escher told her they came to get more resources for their sisters in Hive City, where every mouthful of food or cup of recycled water was treasured. Dawn had a strong feeling they did it because they were sick of Hive City and just wanted to fight. She couldn't blame them. Just a few hours in Hive City had made her understand the desire to give violent release to the unbearable tension she'd felt. To live every day cheek by jowl with a billion angry people in a polluted maze shut away from the skies. Dawn was amazed they didn't all go mad. Or perhaps they did, and that was how they could stand it. So the mad ones, or the sane ones, depending on which way you looked at it, came below to fight. The Goliaths were the diametric opposite of the Escher. A bunch of steroid-fed half-wits who relied on brute force and ignorance to get the job done. This was what the Escher had told her. These Goliaths were outlaws, gang scum who couldn't abide by the coarse rules of the Underhive and had earned a bounty on their heads. The Escher gang's leader, Tessera, had cut a deal with a nearby settlement called Two Tunnels to wipe out the Goliath gang, or at least drive them far enough from the settlement to stop harassing anyone who traveled there. There were only supposed to be half a dozen outlaw Goliaths holed up in the Manufactoria, and the Escher were to outnumber them almost 2 to 1. It didn't feel like that at all at the moment. Donna was alone with the enemy all about her, as evinced by the occasional rattle of stone or clink of metal in the shadows. She had also stayed in the comforting but illusory shelter of the beam for too long, whole stale seconds too long in the midst of a minutes-long firefight. She started to move. A hail of bullets sprayed across the beam, kicking up tiny explosions of dust all around her as she hastily ducked back out of sight. The bullets kept coming, angrily buzz-sawing chunks out of the beam in a seemingly endless stream. When the fusillade stopped, the momentary silence seemed unreal and disorientating to Donna. After the chaos of being under such heavy fire, in the distance she heard the click of a magazine being ejected and that familiar drum, drum, drum of running boots. Something about Tola's words earlier came back to her, and she knelt suddenly upright with her pistol in hand. Pow, pow. A Goliath stood not 5 meters away from her. He was tall, but massive pectorals and biceps made him seem squat and troll-like. Chrome spikes and rings prominently pierced his nipples, face, arms, and crotch. He had a heavy cylinder-fed slug gun in one hand and a steel bar in the other. The Goliath was looking down, dumbly surprised at the two smoking holes Don had put through his meaty chest. He looked about as old as Tola. Don saw the second Goliath right behind him, and amazingly he was even bigger and definitely more ugly and scarred than the other one. He was grinning nastily at Don while slapping a fresh clip into his auto pistol. As he did so, the corpse of his fellow ganger dropped neatly out of his line of fire. She gaped in astonishment at the realization that he had used the younger Goliath to draw her out. How he had callously sent him to an almost certain death to get her to come out of cover. He saw the shocked expression on her face and laughed out loud, a deep booming sound, like rocks falling down a shaft. "Never mind, girly girl," he said, leveling the auto pistol at her. "If you're quick, you'll catch him." Donna's eyes were already closed, and she flinched as shots hammered out, her body tensing involuntarily at the last instant before giving up her life. After a second, she opened them to find she still lived, and instead the Goliath was sprawled in a bloody heap. He seemed shrunken now that hot lead had torn through muscles, organs, and bones. Dawn couldn't get the confused idea out of her head that somehow the auto pistol had misfired and he hit himself lots of times, or something. "That's the last of them," Tessera's firm voice called out. Footsteps scrunched all around Dion as the Escher appeared from the shadows one by one, Big Fair with her heavy stubber still smoking from the deadly burst which had killed the last Goliath. Little Tola smeared with dirt and covered in bruises, looking like the child she was. Avignon and Circe were up in the roof supports with their rifles. Jen, Ali, and Sarah were on the ground with pistols. Crazy Christie had cuts all over her body and a lot of blood on her long, slender sword that wasn't her own. They carried out the other Juve, Veshla, who had a gut wound that probably wouldn't heal before it killed her. Dawn realized that she had never been alone, and that there had always been allies within reach of her. She also realized that Tessera had used her and Tola as bait, just like the Goliath, but with a bit more sophistication. That simply reinforced a lesson she already knew, one she had learned at bitter cost in the Spire. Number one always comes first. Tola came up to her afterwards and said, loud enough for the whole gang to hear, "Watch ya go a running off on your own like that for E. You're mad, Donna."